Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was asked to speak on simple living and high thinking. Probably those of you who are some years in the Krishna conscious movement have heard about this quite a lot. Is it? Heard about simple living, high thinking? It's discussed quite a lot, is it? Not much. Not discussed much. I think it's ironic to be speaking of it in this particular building, which is now the abode of Sri Sri Radha Govinda, but which was actually constructed for the purpose of opulent living, and definitely not for the sake of any philosophy whatsoever. Whoever built this house built it with the idea of living comfortably and enjoying with many servants. Some rich person built it, right? Anyone know the history? Who built it? How long ago? It's a rich man's house, originally built. Someone who had money to spare. It's not just built for functional living. It's for more than that. Right? Anyone know how old the building is?
I think it was built in the 1840s.
1840, it's so old, huh? Really? Yeah. Pretty old.
The Lord Erne, who was the ruler of this area,
Lord Erne.
Erne, yeah.
Erne.
After the lake,
I see. This loch is called Loch Erne.
Yeah.
It's a loch, right? It's called a loch.
Yeah, Loch Erne. So they had one castle down the way.
They had a castle over there.
And at the time the daughter was getting married, and he presented this island and built a house as her wedding.
I see. He presented this island and built a house on it for his daughter. When she got married. So he must have provided, or whoever she married was also a rich person presumably, and could afford to have servants and boats going back and forward carrying provisions and all kinds of things. And or maybe it was just a weekend house or holiday house or something like that. But it definitely was built for what people call high class living, and no question of any philosophy, I wouldn't think. People would go fishing, maybe shooting, like this. It's a gentleman's house. This is. In Western culture, a gentleman means someone who goes fishing and shooting and eats rotten pheasant. Right? I think that's outlawed now, but it used to be part of British high-class culture to shoot a pheasant, hang it up until the maggots were falling out of it, and then cook it. So, our movement is supposed to be dedicated to simple living and high thinking, which is a phrase Srila Prabhupada used often. He didn't invent it by any means. Ravindra Swarup Prabhu found out the apparent source of that. But the idea is, it's quite clear just from the words itself. There's nothing very difficult to understand. Live simply. There's no need to live in a very supposedly sophisticated manner, which makes life unnecessarily complex. Live as simply as possible, and high thinking means we should philosophically consider the purpose of life. Now when we say live as simply as possible, what does that mean? Well, what are the basic necessities for the body? Food, clothing and shelter. So, food can be produced in much of the world locally. Food can be produced or obtained. In a climate like this, it's difficult to produce food products around the year, but the growing season is long enough and the soil is good enough that enough food can be produced in the growing season to keep body and soul together and to have enough food for throughout the year. You can keep potatoes. Ever heard of potatoes? It's not indigenous to Ireland. What did people eat before potatoes arrived? Turnips. Turnips, Swedes, parsnips, and other such wonderful things. Is that right?
I heard that they came later, actually. I heard that they came later.
What?
Things like carrots and,
Carrots also came later.
Yeah, as far as I know, they were eating...
Potatoes came quite late because they came from South America.
Yeah. Also these other root vegetables, I believe, as I heard from Prahlad, he was saying that they were developed later.
What's that?
He was saying to me that they came later, these different vegetables.
Root vegetables, yeah.
Different carrots and things.
What grains grow here? Barley, rye. Do you know? They probably don't grow it anymore. Oats, yeah. Barley doesn't grow? I don't know. Oats, yeah, okay. Oats is the Celtic staple. In Scotland also, that was the stuff. So you can live on oats. You can live on oats alone. Yeah. People would eat, yeah, that's not surprising. Fish, meat.
They had a lot of milk products they would use.
Milk products previously also. Okay, so meat people would eat. It's not, as we want to propagate, it's not necessary to eat meat or fish, but you can imagine that people in this part of the world did so because fish is abundantly available and meat, yeah, deer, rabbits and other creatures, wild creatures. Hares, I don't think you have hares in Ireland, is it? You have hares also? Yeah. Okay. So, food is available of people of higher consciousness, of course. We're talking about high thinking, so people of higher consciousness, they generally don't eat meat, fish, or eggs would have been there also, right? Chickens and eggs. They generally don't eat those foods. When I say generally don't, that means almost always, but there are some instances. We find in the Mahabharata, it's related that once there was a famine, and one of the rishis, I believe it was Yajnavalkya, had his disciples kill cows so that they could eat them. Normally, you wouldn't do that, but that could be allowed in some kind of emergency. Anyway, food, clothing in most parts of the world, clothing can be produced from natural materials. In some parts of the world, clothing is hardly necessary except for the sake of decency. In India now, most of the country is very hot, and clothing is only worn for the sake of decency. And nowadays they have the idea of fashion also. But as I stated this morning, was it, that some people go naked, and some saintly people go naked, or fairly common until recently in North India, and other parts of India also, were sadhus who would wear kopins only. And we know the 6 Goswamis, they would only, in the summer anyway, they would only wear a short cloth around their hips. In this part of the world, more clothing is required, obviously. It's cold pretty much all around the year. But locally, that can be produced. Wool from sheep, flax, linen is produced from. That's famous. Northern Ireland is famous for linen, right? What's that produced from? Flax, yeah. Okay, that's better than cotton. It's supposed to be. more lasting and has better qualities. So, and leather is also allowed in Vedic. It's not totally disallowed. It's considered. Well, the idea of killing animals is generally not considered very good. But if they die naturally, you can use the leather also. The drums, mridangas, we use leather, but that's supposed to come from cows that have died naturally. And actually, if the leather that comes from slaughtered cows is not suitable for mridangas, you won't have the same tone. So, food, clothing, and shelter in every part of the world. Well, when you say every part, that's every inhabitable part, but man has inhabited most of the land, or much of the land. Some people live in deserts, some people live in ice and snow. So even they make houses out of ice and snow. Or in the desert, they make tents, but that's a very difficult way to live. And in this part of the world, houses, where there are stones, then stone would be used in this part of the world, right? Otherwise, out of peat in some parts of Ireland. How's it built from peat, is it? Wood?
Wood or
yeah.
they were using, way back they were using mud.
Mud, yeah. Not peat.
Maybe cow dung.
Cow dung also in Ireland. Cob is coming back in fashion again now. You can build. So they're all. God provides. Nature provides all kinds of. Give them some prasadam.
Sorry. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Please say Hare Krishna. Sure. Take as many as you like. So, here in Ireland and in any part of the world, one can live simply. It is possible to live without cell phones. Remember about 15 years ago? There were no such things. It is possible to live without watches. That's also going out of fashion due to cell phones. Without electricity. Now that's a very tough one for many people, the idea of living without electricity. They say, how can you do it? I personally lived for several years in Bangladesh at a time, mostly traveling in the villages, at a time when most of the village didn't have electricity. And those that did, even if they had electric lines, the electricity would usually only be on for 1 or 2 hours at the most every day. And the voltage was too low to run anything anyway. So now it's changed, and there's electricity is widespread in the villages. And guess what? People have got TVs, and guess what? The culture has changed. And in those days, most of the houses in Bangladesh were built from mud, or mud, thatch, bamboo, some places like that. Nowadays, many people have brick houses. So I experienced what it's like to live without electricity. Believe it or not, it is possible to eat, drink, sleep and breathe and do all other functions required for staying alive without electricity. And life goes on. The first summer I was in Bangladesh, that was 1979. I didn't know until later, but happened to be the hottest summer in more than 40 years. So it was extremely hot. But, no electricity, no fans, no electric fan. Most people never even heard or imagined of such a thing. What to speak of air conditioning? Air conditioning even in the city was very rare. So hand fans made from cane, like this. And life goes on. Difficult, but life goes on. Here in Ireland, it's the other problem, isn't it? Keeping warm. In traditional culture, that would require wood fire, or in much of Ireland, peat, right? And again, when I was traveling in Ireland, must have been 74 before I joined the movement. I don't know about now, but probably still in much of Ireland, peat is the standard fuel. Still? Or gas? Now they're using gas more. It's a standard thing to have a pile of peat outside the home.
They used to cut it by hand, but now they have machines.
I see. And it'd be like a cauldron on top of the fire in which they'd cook the stew. Or another common thing was the stove, in which that would heat the house and heat the water, and you could cook on it also. That was, I don't know if they still have that, but I used this.
They're making a comeback,
Those stoves, yeah, it's quite energy efficient. Metal, so made in a factory, but once you have one in a house, it'll last for generations probably. Doesn't need much maintenance. So, simple living was quite common in Ireland, in much of Ireland, until quite recently at least. I say that people would make their own bread, famous Irish soda bread. And many people lived on small farms, even now, I guess, is it? Or the economy went through a change. The boom before the bust. But one thing that's noticeable from the change that took place was that when people were living simply, then even without the high thinking that we're talking about, people were much more friendly actually. They didn't have very high ambitions. They just living very simply without high ambitions, and they'd know everyone in their local area. And Irish people are very famous for being hospitable and friendly, but when the culture changed to being one of a progressive country with a developed economy, then the attitude the general attitude changed a lot, right? You saw that. Those of you who are aged 35 up, you've seen that, right? How the changing from simple living to so-called sophisticated living changed people for the worse. That's quite visible in Ireland, although people may have thought their life is better because now they have fancy cars and electricity, gas, and what are the other advantages of the boom? Holidays in Tenerife, Ryanair, then
nice semi-detached house or bungalow.
Nice semi-detached house. More urbanization. Dublin grew phenomenally. When I was in Ireland in the mid-70s, early mid-70s, the Greystones that was separate from Dublin. And then after I joined the movement, I came here. And Rathfarnham, we got a house there that was a new housing colony. We got new houses just outside Dublin. So it's well within the city now, right? So urbanization is part of this sophisticated lifestyle. So simple living means in some ways less sophisticated, but in another way, if that high thinking element is there, then it's actually much more sophisticated. The high thinking means not just simple living. Simply to live simply is not in and of itself the goal of life. But the high thinking part, that's necessary. And we see that Vyasadeva, he lived in a cave. He was married, but he did his writing in a cave. And so simplicity in Vedic culture, there were different varnas, and Shudras would live simply, and Brahmanas would live simply, and Kshatriyas and Vaishyas would live more opulent life. So within the same culture, there were differences. The Shudras was simple living and no thinking. Vaishyas, opulent living and not much thinking. Kshatriyas, opulent living, and they're supposed to have more Vedic knowledge. This we find in Bhagavad Gita. That Evang parampara praptam imang raja shayo viduhu. This, the knowledge of Bhagavad Gita, of the Upanishads, was passed down through the chain of succession of the saintly kings. So Kshatriyas, although living an opulent lifestyle, they were expected to also have Vedic knowledge. And Brahmanas, they are the exemplars of simple living and high thinking. That the best of the Brahmanas, they embrace simple living. They prefer that. They prefer not to be entangled with unnecessary encumbrances, which, as we can see, the more objects we get, cell phones, blueberries, is it? Blueberries, blackberries, whatever. Actual blueberries and blackberries are okay, but there's some kind of cell phone, something like that. Blackberry. Yeah. Blackberry, yeah. Some kind of cell phone. And all kinds of objects and machines, that life becomes more complex. And it requires a complex kind of society to keep it all going with credit cards and loans and mortgage schemes and all kinds of things. No steady job or any such thing. So the high thinking part, that's the really essential part. But that is fostered by simple living. If you, Srila Prabhupada's idea for simple living, living on farms, was not so much the farming per se. That's also important. But the main thing, Srila Prabhupada would say, is to save time for activities directly aimed at God realization. To save time for Krishna consciousness, as Prabhupada would put it. Because in modern life, in the name of progress, people are so busy, they're working so hard, and the whole idea of ambition and get ahead, it absorbs the focus of your consciousness. You're supposed to give your full attention to some materialistic goal and be completely tuned in to your company's wishes, and you have to act in a way that the company wants you to. Or if you're doing your own business, you have to be very competitive, it requires sharp concentration and absorption, because if you don't get it right, then you are out of business. So the simple living, there are many advantages, but the main one is so that we can save time for cultivating Krishna consciousness. There are other advantages also. I mean, the farm communities that Srila Prabhupada wanted, that provides association with devotees. The devotees can all live together on our own terms. We don't have to conform to the norms and expectations of materialistic people, which one is required to do if one is required to do, at least to some extent, if one is living with and interacting with the general materialistic society. So that provides association for the devotees and protects us from the bad association of non-devotees. That gives us the opportunity also to protect cows, which is an essential part of Vedic culture. There's no Brahminical culture without protecting cows. It enables us to live in a more healthy manner. For instance, we can grow food, offer it to Krishna, and thus take prasadam, which is not only spiritually potent, but materially very healthy, tasty also. People in the modern age don't know what vegetables taste like because they're all grown with so many chemicals and then treated with preservatives, transported. People don't know the fresh vegetable. You take from the ground, immediately cook them, offer to Krishna, and the flavor is quite different from something which even if it's 24 hours old, which most of the vegetables, if you buy, are going to be older than that. The same flavor won't be there. There are lots of nettles around here, by the way. You can make nettle soup, for instance. It's in the spring. It's a good soup. They won't sting you. You have it. How do you cook the nettles? You cook them like soup or?
You can cook them with a little oil and a grated ginger.
Like spinach, yeah.
He made samosas.
Nettle samosas. Yeah.
They're really good.
So that was a major part of Srila Prabhupada's program. He said that 50% of my work isn't done, which is amazing when you think what he did. That he wanted to establish Varnashram Dharma, which is based on simple living and high thinking communities. So when you tell me that you haven't heard that much about it, I'm surprised, because I thought here, of all places, you would hear more about it, because you're living on the lap of Mother Nature and have all facilities for developing that. As I came out round the back of the building, I was very happy to see a cow for about half a second until I realized that it was a plastic cow. I thought that we should bring out to the devotees in the evening plastic glasses with plastic milk in it. If you want plastic cows, you should get plastic replicas of milk. When you can keep real cows, it's easier to keep plastic cows. But the real thing is to keep real cows. Prabhupada wanted to demonstrate that cow protection. He was very much concerned with cow protection. Cow slaughters undermining the whole human society. Srila Prabhupada said something about the Western society. He said in many ways it's very nice how they have systems for looking after the people, like healthcare, not in America, but in Britain. At that time, I think the National Health Service is gradually being undermined. Is it not? Beginning with Thatcher, and now again they're undermining it. But from after the Second World War, the British government established the National Health Service. So there were things like that which Prabhupada thought was very good. The housing arrangement. He said, but he said, why did they kill the cows? If they would only stop this, their society would be so nice. And particularly Prabhupada wanted to stop that cow killing. So if we can demonstrate how nice it is to look after cows and how healthful and how practical it is actually. The cow gives milk, but she also gives dung and urine, which are very valuable nutrients for the soil. And dung can be used in other ways also, for cleaning. It's highly antiseptic. For fuel. So it has many uses. A few years ago at Bhaktivedanta Manor, I was there with my material body's father, and there was a paddock in which there was a small Hereford. You have them over here, Herefords? No, I don't have them much. Hereford is one breed of, usually it's for beef, but anyway, somehow or other we had in the paddock there. Look, I'm not sure, but it looked to me like a Hereford. I haven't lived in this part of the world for years, but from previous experience I thought it was a Hereford. And the inside the bullock, I believe it was just inside the paddock. So I stretched out my hand and started stroking it, and my father was so surprised. Oh, it's so tame, because you expect in India when you go to pet cows, they're mostly some of them get a bit uptight, but mostly they're used to that. Whereas in this part of the world, they're mostly very afraid because they're so mistreated. So if the cow is protected nicely, then Mother Earth, she becomes very happy. Krishna becomes very happy. That's an essential part of human society. The Vaishya community, their main duty is to protect the cows, to physically do the work of doing so. And a Kshatriya means one who protects. So it doesn't mean only the human beings, but all the living beings, and especially the cows. So it's very sinful to kill cows. And interestingly, traditionally, or anyway, since the time of factory farming, which means, I guess, from the middle of the last century, after the Second World War, Northern Ireland's one of its economic staples has been beef cattle. So, surprise, surprise, that people are killing each other in Northern Ireland when killing cows is the staple of the economy, then don't expect peace within the society. So these principles are to be shown in our books. We're distributing books, we're preaching, and we're speaking about these principles of cow protection, of living simply, of high thinking. So that's absolutely essential to the mission of Srila Prabhupada, to develop all of these things. So they think, well, that's all right, you can talk about it, and then I'll hop on a plane and go somewhere else. How am I living like that? But speaking about it is a beginning. And I can factually say that by my speaking about it, several devotees have actually started to live like this and are developing projects like this. So, although I'm speaking about it, I was specifically asked to do so by Gopala Acharya Prabhu. So, see what you can do. Something should be developed. Prabhupada, he didn't like if the land was left unused. It should be used. So if there's land, it should be utilized. Either for forest, orchard, agriculture, horticulture, whatever. The land should be used. Okay, any questions or comments there? It's a huge topic. It seems that it's almost been dropped within our society. But some are still pushing it on. Bhakti Raghav Swami is pushing on Varnashram mission, which means back to the land. So he's very active in that. Tejas Prabhu on the theoretical level, we can say, which is the beginning level. He was ordered, Srila Prabhupada gave him many orders for developing a farmers movement within India and for various other projects. So he's, despite the limitations of his health and his age, he's very busy in writing and networking with people about that. And gradually, we hope, if Krishna gives him the strength, energy and lifespan to do so, he's going to do something significant in that line. Daneshwar Prabhu was here fairly recently, was it? So he's very much into that. He's helping to develop things, especially in Ukraine. But it may come to that anyway very soon. That people will automatically they'll go back to the land because the cities won't function without the oil, with the oil supply which is diminishing and getting harder and harder to get because the easily available oil is all finished all over the world, and most of the oil is in places unfriendly to the Western powers, or they're friendly by force now. Iraq is friendly by force. Otherwise they didn't like America. Iran, since the toppling of the Shah, has been quite inimical to the Western powers, whose lifestyle is based on oil. So when the oil runs out, then people are going to have to run out of the cities. And even before the oil crunch comes even harder than it is now, it's definitely coming. There's no doubt about that. The supply of oil all over the world is maybe peaked. We're around peaking time, if you know all about the oil talk. Food crises are coming with the weather drastically changing, as we're seeing. We used to read about if we don't do something about it quick, there'll be a crisis. Well, now the time for doing something quick is over. The crisis is upon us. The weather is changing in so many places. Russia last year for about 4 or 5 months, they had temperatures every day over 40 Celsius. You use Celsius here? Whatever it is, it's damn hot. I don't know what that is. Over 100 Fahrenheit, which is unheard of in Russia. And village wells were drying up, which no one had ever heard of. Villages were burning, and the wheat crop, which is the main food, was reduced by 2/3. And in India this year, the mango crop, India produces more than 50% of the world's mango, was a flop because of unseasonal rains. In America, they started having these terrible hurricanes in the summer. Now they're having them in the spring this year. And hundreds of people have died this spring in America from storms. One result of that is that the corn crop, America runs on corn. Corn is used for so many things, not only for food, but even for industrial purposes, making alcohol and for industrial purposes. So many things corn is used for. So the corn crop is severely affected this year in America. And earthquakes all over the place, and tsunami in Japan. I mean, all these natural disturbances are coming because man has mistreated Mother Earth so badly that the balance is gone. The ozone layer is out. The Arctic ice is melting. The Gangotri glacier is melting, which means that the Ganga, which is the life blood of North India, may dry up. And then millions, literally hundreds of millions of people rely on the Ganga. So in so many ways, even before the oil crisis comes, the food crisis is likely to come. And we won't be able to have a mass factory farming and or bring the food from one side of the world to the other for people to eat. And then people are going to have to move to farms anyway, if they're to live. Many people may die. When this kind of thing happens, usually governments make wars. That's usually what happens. People get so uptight and against the government, and then they make a war against someone, or there's a civil war. So, looks like we're in for many disturbances. Already a marked phenomenon in the United States is that young people of what we could call a promising background with university degrees and promising careers are leaving those promising careers and moving to the land and homesteading. Because they see this society that they're living in, and they don't want to live in it, and they want to live more simply. They may not have the high thinking. So all the things that Prabhupada, he recommended for our movement, we could be in the lead of all of this if we did what Prabhupada wanted us to do. A few years ago, a disciple of mine, Mahatattva, he's preaching in America, preaching to young people to join the temple, which is almost unheard of in America these days. So he told me about the Rainbow Festival in America, which is where mostly younger people, many young people come together from all over the country in a very remote location without electricity for several days, and they goof off and play music, and many of them go naked, and anyway, they're just generally showing how they'd like to live differently it's just the opposite way from the typical American city lifestyle. So Mahatattva Prabhu wrote to me that every time we go to the Rainbow Festival, we bring back several new devotees to live in the temple. So I wrote back to him and said that if we establish our farm communities, we won't have to go anywhere. Hundreds of people will come to us because people are looking for that. Okay, anyone has any questions, comments, protests, doubts, suggestions?
It seems like a lot of devotees, for one reason or another, don't really take seriously the idea of...
Many devotees don't take seriously the idea of... I'm just repeating it for the sake of the recording.
Can't really see the decline of our present mode of economics.
They can't see the decline of our present mode of economics. Well, there are many non-devotees who can see it. It's a funny thing that our devotees... they're trying to get in line with the modern society in so many ways when so many people in the modern society are getting out of line with it and seeing that it's a sinking ship and jumping off it, and we're trying to go back and join the orthodox, a failed orthodoxy. I mean, we're supposed to be giving the alternative, right? The alternative way of life, but instead we're trying to become normal in the eyes of people who even people of no idea of devotional service can understand that the establishment or the orthodoxy is rotten, inside out, upside down, front to back. It's a failed society. People can see that, but somehow or other our devotees and they think we have to become impressive to the academia, who again, it's a failed academia. The people are literally voting with their feet by leaving this society and going to the land. And we can go among the public, and there's so many people, and tell them that the whole society is simply cheating you, and people will accept that. Many people will accept that. few years ago in London, I guess it was about 10 years ago now, 10, 12 years ago, I was at the Rath Yatra. After the Rath Yatra in Trafalgar Square, they have after the Rath Yatra, which terminates in Trafalgar Square, they have a program in Trafalgar Square, and I was put in the questions and answers booth. So there are all kinds of people there lampooning me and, members of the public just shooting verbally at me. And I was answering them, but after some time I lost my cool a bit. And I said, hey, look, all you people, you're all talking as if you know a lot, but you don't know anything. You've simply been cheated and programmed from your birth by the educational system, by the mass media, by your family, to become an unthinking member of a society that exploits you. And everyone just, they're all just heckling, that's the word. They all went quiet. And someone said, he's right. Oh no, there's one more thing I said. It said, you have no idea of the actual purpose of life. You have no idea of anything spiritual. You have no idea about anything except simply working, getting money, getting food, and living like an animal like that. It's recorded. I can't remember exactly what they said. And they were just, oh, he's right. I mean, you can tell people this, but somehow or other we can't tell our devotees like this. They say, oh, we have to get in line with this, get a brolly and a bowler hat and a pinstripe suit and go to work. So we're not only not in the lead, we're not only not leading the society, but we're joining forces with those who are already left behind by others who can see further into the future and see that the whole modern society is like a big, highly decorated, sophisticated looking car which is heading straight into a brick wall. Looks good, but it's doomed. And we should be giving the alternative. Yeah.
I heard one analogy with one of these, say, foreseers of the crash of the present, all those things. He said that it's like...
But I'll just interrupt there. It's not that everything that people, so many people are predicting so many things. May the 21st was Doomsday, right? Judgment Day. So it's not necessary that we believe that everyone who talks about it. But, Prabhupada himself said in the 1970s that this society, within 50 years, will all be finished. And, there are very clear signs that, like the oil supplies, it's all being searched all over the world. And all the easily available oil has already been taken out. And whatever oil is there to be got, some is there still there, but it's all in the easily available oil is in place like Iran, Iraq, which is not. It's in terms of geology it's easily available, but in terms of politics it's not easily available. And the North Sea oil, it's all over. It's in America up until the 1930s or something. America was flowing in Texas oil. It's finished. And oil may be available in some place, but it's either very deep or deep in the ocean and difficult to get out. And look what happened in the ocean if something goes wrong. That BP disaster off Florida. So, or there may be oil which is so difficult to get that it may be just not economical to get it out anyway. Or you require almost as much energy to put in as you get energy taking out. So, you can talk of alternative power like windmills. Around here there are some windmills, right? There's plenty of wind, but oil is required for certain functions that windmills can't provide. So that's one side. Our whole present civilization is based on oil, and it's definitely coming to an end. It's a verifiable fact. It's got nothing to do with Krishna consciousness, but it's just a fact of this world. Unless maybe they'll try and find some on the moon and build a pipeline from the moon, but they didn't think of that one yet. Hey, maybe I can get a Nobel Prize for suggesting that. Moon oil exploration. And let's all move to the moon. Or Mars. Why not? Now that we've trashed this planet, and let's go somewhere else and trash another one. Let's all emigrate to Mars. Want to do that? Don't think it's a very... You want to emigrate to Golok Vrindavan. Yeah, it's not a very practical policy, is it? Well, if they actually went to the moon, as they say, I was wondering, why didn't they go back? Because, they say there's nothing there, but there must be gold, diamonds, and all those kind of things. If what they say about the moon is true, that it's formerly part of the earth, there must be plenty of gold, diamonds, and all kinds of things up there, right? They could pay.
They said there was something like 9 million.
Well, they haven't been for many years, right? So if they could go there and they could pay for their moon trips instead of taking it from the taxpayers, right? You could make some device to mine the gold, find the gold, mine the gold, and bring it back and pay for your moon trips. So, Hare Krishna. I think I'll finish there unless anyone has anything else to say.
Should we use the cow milk when we don't have cow protection?
Should we use cow milk when we don't have cow protection? According to Srila Prabhupada's advice, yes, we should. But we should also establish cow protection. We shouldn't go forever without it. Yeah.
Yeah, there were cows here before, as you might know.
There were cows. Yeah.
There's one cow left now on the and it's one person looking after.
One person looking after the cows. Yeah, it requires cow protection in the traditional way of doing it requires people, sufficient people, and those who are dedicated to people who don't move around. In former society, people stayed in one place all day. The normal thing to do was to stay in one place all your life. And so it was a normal thing to do. All around here, people used to have their own, everywhere, every farmer had a little land and cows, right? My old uncle, what was his name? I can't remember his name now. Up in Donegal. Yeah, he had 2-3 cows like that. Little land. And they lived.
Yeah, devotees seem to be afraid of getting back into cow protection. We have talked about it.
Devotees are afraid to get into cow protection. Yeah, it's a big commitment because cows means they need looking after, and there are no holidays for looking after cows. It's you have to be dedicated. But like I say, if you live in one place all your life, without moving around here and there, which actually isn't necessary. I'm saying that I'm a sannyasi. I'm required to move around. But for grihastas, the normal thing to do is not to move around, just to stay in one place and not to commute into a city for work. You walk to your field, that's all. And it's a normal thing to keep cows.
Yeah, it's a very complex thing because the grihastas, for example, they would need a gurukul for their children. But
grihastas need a gurukul for their children, yeah.
When there is no gurukul, they tend to go somewhere where there is.
Right, if there isn't a gurukul, they'll go somewhere where there is one, or a school of sorts. It's like you have to have all the elements in place all at once.
Yeah, and then you see, nobody can commit themselves to stay.
No one wants to commit themselves. Well, that's the thing. Someone has to make the commitment and take the risk and do the needful. If everyone waits for everyone else to do it, then it doesn't happen. But that's what I'm saying. By preaching about it, you can get enough devotees interested to come together and do something, as I'm seeing from my own preaching, that at least in India, where in general the culture is more favorable to these things. There are devotees who are coming together and making farm communities and gurukuls from the beginning. And one of their main motives is they don't want their kids to be spoiled by the karmi schools. So they feel and they require that for their children to have our own schools where they can learn about Krishna.